Lightning doesn't just strike electrical lines, sometimes it strikes the heart of who we think we are. When the storm hit Maple Ridge Drive, it didn't just cut the power, it cut through years of careful isolation. The first crack of thunder rolled across Maple Ridge Drive at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. It changed everything. The suburban neighborhood had been humming with its usual electronic symphony: air conditioners, push notifications, television streaming Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. Then lightning struck the transformer, and suddenly, silence. Marcus Rodriguez was in the middle of a video conference with Tokyo clients when his laptop lost internet connection. No power meant no internet. No internet meant no work. His carefully orchestrated schedule was about to implode. "Sarah," he called to his wife downstairs. "The power's out." Sarah's strained voice drifted up from the kitchen where she was homeschooling their 8-year-old. "Tyler, Tyler's tablet just died, and he's having a complete meltdown." Marcus grabbed his phone. No Wi-Fi, no cellular data. The storm had taken out more than just their street's power, it had severed their digital lifeline entirely. Down the street, 16-year-old Ava Martinez was dealing with a crisis of her own. Digital withdrawal. Her vlog edits, social media drafts, even her cloud storage. Gone. The internet had cut out mid-export, and now her phone refused to connect. "Mom," she shouted from her room, "there's no internet connection." "Like 0 bars. What is happening?" "Mine neither," came Elena Martinez's reply from the living room. "Nothing's working." 13-year-old Luca emerged from his bedroom, game controller in hand. "The Xbox is dead," he announced with disaster-level gravity. It was as though he'd just heard about a plane crash. Elena looked at her children, really looked at them for the first time in months. Without screen glow illuminating their faces, they seemed more present, more real. It was unsettling. 3 houses down, 78-year-old Naomi Blackwood lit a candle with practiced ease. She was old enough to remember life before constant connectivity. The storm rattled her windows, but inside, she felt unusual peace. The peace didn't last. Within an hour, panic spread through the neighborhood. Marcus calculated that every offline hour cost his consulting business $300. Sarah couldn't access Tyler's curriculum, and their son had progressed from meltdown to feral behavior. "I'm bored," Tyler wailed. "There's nothing to do." "We have books," Sarah suggested weakly. "Books are stupid. I want my tablet." The Martinez family faced their own crisis. Elena realized their refrigerator food would spoil, and she couldn't cook without their electric stove. Ava paced like a caged animal, muttering about followers and streaks. "This is literally the worst thing that's ever happened to me," she declared, collapsing dramatically. Luca discovered that boredom could be physically painful. He'd tried reading but couldn't focus, attempted drawing but gave up, even considered cleaning his room, but dismissed that as too desperate. The only person prepared was Mrs. Chen, Marcus's neighbor. Her garage stocked enough supplies for a small apocalypse, and her backup generator kicked in automatically. While neighbors stumbled in gathering darkness, she calmly cooked on her camping stove, listening to battery-powered radio weather updates. The storm would last through Thursday. Power restoration could take 72 hours. As the first night fell, the true scope of disconnection became apparent. No streetlights, no porch lights, no familiar electronic glow from windows. Marcus had given up working after his laptop died. For the first time in years, he had absolutely nothing to do. The sensation was deeply uncomfortable. Sarah had wrangled Tyler into bed with promises of a camping adventure, but once their son slept, she and Marcus sat in their dark kitchen, unsure how to fill the silence. "When's the last time we just talked?" Sarah whispered. Marcus considered seriously. "I mean, we talk every day. About schedules and logistics. When did we last have a real conversation?" The question hung between them like the darkness outside. The next morning brought intensified rain and no relief. Water cascaded down storm drains, and Marcus felt something like panic rising. 72 hours without internet meant clients would find other consultants, his reputation would suffer, and his career could crumble. But then he noticed Mrs. Chen across the street, systematically clearing debris from storm drains with tools. Water was backing up, threatening to flood the lower houses, including the Martinez home. Without realizing it, Marcus found himself putting on rain boots and heading outside. "Need help?" he called over the rain. Mrs. Chen looked up, surprised. In 5 years of living across from each other, they'd exchanged perhaps 20 words. Storm drains clogged. Water's gonna flood Elena's basement if we don't clear it. Marcus grabbed his rake and joined her. Soon, other neighbors emerged. Elena appeared with work gloves, determined to save her basement. Luca, desperate for any activity, grabbed a shovel. Even Ava, grumbling about her hair, joined the effort. The work was harder than Marcus expected. Years of desk jobs had left him soft, but there was something satisfying about solving problems with his hands instead of his laptop. "I didn't know you had a generator," Ava said to Mrs. Chen during a rest. Mrs. Chen smiled. "Most people think I'm crazy, but times like this, being prepared isn't crazy, it's necessary." Ava had never thought of Mrs. Chen as anything other than the weird neighbor with too many deliveries. But watching her orchestrate their flood prevention, Ava saw her differently. Mrs. Chen wasn't paranoid, she was practical, self-sufficient in ways Ava had never encountered. By midday, they'd cleared the drains and prevented flooding. Standing in the rain, muddy and exhausted, they realized, besides awkward hellos as they passed in the street, they didn't really know each other. They'd certainly never worked together on anything. Mrs. Chen broke the silence. "Anyone hungry? I've got soup cooking." The invitation was unexpected. Mrs. Chen had lived there for 15 years and never hosted so much as coffee. But something about the storm, their shared effort, had shifted the neighborhood's dynamics. Elena accepted first. "That sounds wonderful. I can't cook anything at my house anyway." Sarah looked at Marcus, who shrugged. "Tyler would love that. He thinks Mrs. Chen is a superhero now." Mrs. Chen's dining room, lit by lanterns and candles, was filled with neighbors who'd never shared more than polite waves. The soup was simple vegetable broth with canned garden vegetables but tasted special. Tyler, freed from screen-induced lethargy, chattered excitedly about the morning's adventure. Luca, normally sullen, described elaborate drainage system plans. Ava asked Mrs. Chen detailed disaster preparedness questions, genuinely interested in answers that didn't come from YouTube. But Naomi Blackwood's arrival transformed the gathering from a practical meal to something magical. Sarah had knocked on the elderly woman's door. Worried about her being alone, Naomi brought hot tea and stories that brought the room to life. "This house used to belong to the Johnsons," she said, settling into Mrs. Chen's offered chair. "Margaret Johnson threw wonderful dinner parties. Every Friday night, the whole street would gather here." "Really?" Elena asked. "I can't imagine everyone just hanging out together." Naomi smiled. "Different times. People knew their neighbors then. Had to. Really. If your car broke down, you couldn't call an Uber. If you needed sugar, you couldn't order it online. We depended on each other." Tyler, uncharacteristically quiet, piped up. "Why did people stop having dinner parties?" The innocent question landed with unexpected weight. The adults exchanged glances, mentally cataloging reasons: busy schedules, digital entertainment, social media providing a connection, illusion without relationship, effort. "Life got faster," Naomi said gently, "and louder. Harder to hear each other over all the noise." Thunder rumbled across the sky. The storm was intensifying, and afternoon light faded under heavy clouds. Mrs. Chen stood to light more candles. "Storm's not letting up. Radio says we might not see power until Thursday." The second night brought new challenges. Without electric heat, houses were becoming uncomfortably cold. Mrs. Chen's generator powered essentials, but couldn't heat the entire neighborhood. Someone suggested they all sleep in Mrs. Chen's living room. The idea was practical body heat, shared blankets, safety in numbers. But arranging sleeping bags in the candlelit space felt like something else entirely. Tyler was beside himself with excitement. "It's like the best sleepover ever," he declared, bouncing between air mattresses. Ava had initially balked. Sleeping with family was bad enough, but with all the neighbors felt like a social nightmare. However, faced with communal warmth versus shivering alone, she reluctantly agreed. Luca discovered Mrs. Chen owned impressive board game collections, actual physical games with pieces, cards, and dice. He convinced Tyler to try Monopoly, and within an hour, the boys were engaged in an epic property war with adults placing baits and offering strategic advice. "I haven't played Monopoly in 20 years, Marcus admitted, watching Tyler bankrupt Luca with hotel-laden boardwalk. I haven't played anything not on a screen in 10, Sarah added. Naomi positioned herself as evening entertainment director, with endless stories about neighborhood history, families in each house, and changes she'd witnessed over decades. As evening progressed and games wound down, conversation grew deeper. Maybe it was candlelight, unusual sleeping intimacy, or simply absent digital distractions, but people began discussing things they'd never shared with neighbors. Elena confessed to struggling since her divorce, raising Ava and Luca alone while working full-time. Sarah admitted feeling isolated as a stay-at-home mom, and that adult conversation had become a rare luxury. Marcus talked about constant work availability pressure, not taking a real vacation in 3 years. Mrs. Chen surprised everyone by revealing she'd started prepping after her husband died 5 years earlier. The world was becoming less reliable. Figured I better learn to rely on myself. But Ava offered the most unexpected insight. I post 5 times daily on social media. I have thousands of followers. But I don't think I have any real friends. Like, people I could actually talk to about stuff that matters. The admission hung in the air. Here was a 16-year-old, supposedly the most connected generation ever, describing loneliness that the adults recognized in themselves. When I was your age, Naomi said gently, friendship meant something different. You couldn't hide behind screens, you had to show up, be present, deal with messy real human interaction. That sounds terrifying, Ava said, but smiled. It was, Naomi agreed, but it was also wonderful. The third day dawned gray and drizzly, but the worst had passed. The neighborhood woke together in Mrs. Chen's living room, sharing camp stove coffee and planning their day, without usual digital agendas. Tyler appointed himself official meteorologist, checking the sky constantly and providing weather updates based on cloud formations and wind patterns. His reports were wildly inaccurate, but delivered with such authority that adults nodded seriously. Luca convinced Ava to help build an elaborate backyard for, using tarps, and wrote, the project was ambitious and probably doomed, but watching the siblings work together without arguing was entertainment enough. Marcus found himself helping Mrs. Chen with house maintenance tasks. For someone who'd spent a decade troubleshooting software, there was deep satisfaction in fixing leaky faucets with actual tools. Elena had stationed herself as Naomi's companion, helping the elderly woman navigate uneven ground and listening to more neighborhood stories. During the conversation, Naomi mentioned feeling dizzy lately, having balance trouble. Have you seen a doctor? Elena asked. Oh, you know how it is. At my age, something's always wrong. I don't like bothering anyone. The comment bothered Elena more than she showed. Here was a woman living alone for years, too proud or considerate to ask for help. How many other elderly neighbors struggled in silence while everyone stayed locked in digital bubbles? The afternoon brought an unexpected crisis. Tyler and Luca had been playing in their built fort when Tyler decided to explore the woods behind Mrs. Chen's property. On normal days, Sarah would have immediately called him back, worried about dirt, getting lost, or being out of sight. But the power outage had shifted everyone's risk tolerance. Kids playing outside, unsupervised, had become normal again, even encouraged. So when Tyler wandered into the trees, no one immediately noticed. Only when early evening light began fading and Tyler didn't respond to dinner calls did panic set in. Adults spread through the neighborhood, calling his name, checking every hiding spot. But without flashlights, batteries had died after 2 days, and searching became increasingly difficult. He was just here, Luca kept saying, voice tight with guilt. He said he was looking for cool rocks, then he was gone. Sarah was trying to hold together, but Marcus could see terror building in her eyes. In their normal, connected world, a missing child would trigger an immediate response: police calls, social media alerts, and GPS tracking. Now they faced every parent's nightmare with nothing but voices and dying light. Mrs. Chen organized the search effort, distributing emergency flashlights, assigning search areas, and establishing base operations in her backyard. But even with her organizational skills, the situation felt desperate. Woods behind the neighborhood were larger than they appeared, with several paths leading to busy roads. The search had been going 20 minutes, that felt like hours when Ava made a surprising suggestion. What if we just ... listen? Like, really listen. Without all the usual noise, cars and air conditioners and everything, maybe we can hear him. It was such a simple idea that none of the adults had considered it. They'd been focused on covering ground, systematic searching, and doing something active. But Ava was right, they now had access to something lost in modern lives, actual silence. The group stood still in Mrs. Chen's backyard, straining to hear beyond their own breathing and heartbeats. For a moment, there was nothing but wind in trees and water dripping from yesterday's rain. Then, faintly, they heard it. Tyler's voice, calling for help. The sound came from the house of Naomi. The group rushed toward it, flashlights sweeping the ground, following Tyler's increasingly desperate calls. They found him in Naomi's backyard, standing on her back porch steps. "Mom," he called when he saw their lights. "Something's wrong with Miss Naomi." Sarah reached her son first, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "Tyler, you scared us to death. What are you doing here?" "I was looking for rocks, and I heard Miss Naomi calling for help. But the door is locked, and she's not answering anymore." The adults exchanged worried glances. Mrs. Chen tried the back door locked. Marcus ran to the front, also locked. Elena cupped her hands against the living room window, trying to see inside. "There," she said. "I can see her at the bottom of the stairs." Mrs. Chen didn't hesitate. She picked up a decorative garden rock and smashed the back door window, reaching through to unlock it from inside. They found Naomi conscious, clearly in pain, lying at her staircase bottom with a broken wrist and possibly worse injuries. She'd been there over an hour, unable to reach a phone, unable to call for help in a world where calling for help had become impossible. "I was trying to get a blanket from upstairs," she explained weakly. "Lost my footing, been having dizzy spells lately." Mrs. Chen immediately took charge, checking vital signs and assessing injuries with the competence of someone clearly prepared for medical emergencies. Marcus and Elena carefully helped move Naomi to her couch, while Sarah called 911 from Mrs. Chen's landline, one of the few communication forms still working. Paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, but the incident had shaken everyone. If Tyler hadn't wandered off, if he hadn't heard Naomi's calls, if they hadn't been able to listen in unusual silence, she could have died alone while neighbors went about their business just yards away. As the ambulance pulled away, the group stood in Naomi's driveway, processing what had almost happened. "She's been living alone all this time," Elena said quietly. "We see her every day, wave hello, and none of us really knew she was struggling. We're all so busy looking at our phones," Ava added. "We forget to look at each other." The observation was devastating in its accuracy. Here were people who'd shared property lines and weather patterns for years, remaining essentially strangers until a storm forced them together. Tyler, still shaken, positioned himself firmly between his parents. But his experience had also given him a new understanding of his community role. "I'm glad I got lost," he announced with matter-of-fact childhood wisdom. "If I didn't get lost, we wouldn't have found Miss Naomi." The adults couldn't argue with his logic. The fourth morning brought news no one was ready to hear. Power would be restored that afternoon. Utility trucks had worked through the night, and Maple Ridge Drive was next for reconnection. The announcement should have been cause for celebration. Instead, the news felt like a countdown to something ending. They spent the morning in strange suspended animation, knowing their brief analog living experiment was concluding but reluctant to let it go. Mrs. Chen had returned from visiting Naomi with good news. Injuries weren't as severe as feared. She'd be released the next day, but also with a sobering reminder of how close they'd come to tragedy. "She wants to move to assisted living," Mrs. Chen reported. "Says this experience showed her she can't live alone anymore." The news hit hard. Naomi had been their storyteller, their connection to neighborhood history, their reminder that community used to mean something different. The thought of her leaving felt like losing something irreplaceable. "Maybe she doesn't have to live alone," Ava said quietly. "Maybe we could check on her more often. Make sure she's okay." "We could," Elena agreed, "if we remember to look up from our phones." Tyler had spent the morning making a list of things he wanted to remember about their powerless days. Written in careful 8-year-old handwriting, it included Mrs. Chen's soup, building forts with Luca, and everyone sleeping in the same room. At the bottom, in larger letters, being together. Luca had been unusually quiet, and when his mother asked what he was thinking, His answer surprised her. "I don't want to go back to being angry all the time." Elena realized she hadn't seen her son lose his temper once in 3 days. The constant low-level irritation that had become his default mood had completely disappeared during the blackout. "What makes you angry?" she asked. Luca considered it seriously. "Social media, I guess. Seeing other people who seem to have better lives. Games are designed to be frustrating, so you'll spend money. YouTubers are always yelling about stuff." He paused. "I didn't realize how much time I spend being mad about things that aren't even real." His insight was remarkable for 13, reflecting wisdom emerging in all of them. Without constant digital stimulation, they'd rediscovered emotional states they'd forgotten. Patience, contentment, present moment awareness. The return of power was announced by the sudden humming of appliances throughout the neighborhood. Refrigerators kicked on, air conditioners resumed cooling, and somewhere distant, a television began broadcasting missed news. For a moment, no one moved. They were gathered in Mrs. Chen's living room, playing cards and talking, and electricity's return felt like an intrusion rather than relief. Tyler was the first to break the spell. "Can we finish the game first, before everyone goes back to their own houses?" The adults agreed, but knew they were postponing the inevitable. Within hours, phones would buzz with notifications, email inboxes would demand attention, and pre-blackout life rhythms would reassert themselves with inexorable force. But something had changed in those 72 hours. As they completed their card game and gathered belongings from Mrs. Chen's house, they moved more slowly and necessary, reluctant to break their forged connection. "So," Mrs. Chen said as they prepared to return to separate homes, "what happens now?" The question hung like a challenge. It could pretend the past 3 days had been an interesting anomaly, a dinner party story about the time they got to know neighbors. They could return to previous patterns of polite waves and minimal interaction. Or they could choose something different. "I have an idea," Ava said, surprising herself with boldness. "What if we did this once a month, like, voluntarily? Turn off all our devices for a weekend and actually spend time together." The suggestion met initial skepticism. A forced blackout was one thing, but voluntarily disconnecting felt like a much bigger commitment. "I don't know if I could do it," Marcus admitted. "My work could survive 48 hours, Sarah finished. The world functioned before email existed. Elena looked at her children, both nodding enthusiastically at Ava's suggestion. "You two would really want to give up devices for a whole weekend. If it meant we got to do stuff like this," Luca said, gesturing around Mrs. Chen's living room where they'd spent 3 days building connections instead of consuming content. "Then yeah." Mrs. Chen, listening with growing interest, made an offer that surprised everyone. "You could use my house, I've got the space, and I kind of like having people around." The admission was telling. Mrs. Chen's preparedness hadn't just been about surviving disasters, it had been about surviving loneliness. Her stockpiled supplies and backup systems had been hedges against isolation as much as emergencies. Tyler, remarkably patient during adult discussion, finally spoke up. "Can we invite Miss Naomi to when she gets better?" The question settled the matter. They would try Ava's experiment. Once a month, they would voluntarily create their own blackout, gather at Mrs. Chen's house, turn off devices, and see if they could recreate forced disconnection magic through intentional choice. 6 months later, Maple Ridge Drive had become something unprecedented in modern suburban life, a place where neighbors knew each other, supported each other, and prioritized collective well-being over individual convenience. The transformation wasn't without challenges. There were conflicts over resource sharing, disagreements about decision-making, and moments when old isolation patterns felt more appealing than community maintenance work. But rewards were unexpected. Tyler's academic progress accelerated when learning became collaborative and hands-on. Luca's chronic anger disappeared when social needs were met through real relationships rather than online interactions. Ava's content creation became more fulfilling when it served a purpose beyond personal fame. Elena found single parenthood manageable with consistent neighbor support, genuinely invested in her children's well-being. Marcus discovered that work-life balance was achievable, and life included meaningful relationships and community responsibilities. Mrs. Chen found that her preparedness was most valuable in serving collective resilience rather than individual survival. And Naomi, who begun the storm as an isolated elderly woman, ended it as a beloved community elder, her stories and wisdom valued by neighbors who become chosen family. The insurance adjuster returned a year later, curious about the neighborhood that had declined relocation offers. He found something unexpected, a community that had become more resilient through connection rather than technology, more prepared through cooperation rather than individual stockpiling. Tyler, now 9 and serving as the unofficial neighborhood welcome committee, approached the adjuster with confidence that comes from knowing you belong somewhere. "Are you here about the storm?" he asked. "Because we figured out how to make it so storms aren't scary anymore." The adjuster looked down at the bow, then at the neighborhood around him, people working together, children playing safely, elderly residents integrated into daily community life, and realized Tyler was right. They had indeed figured out how to make storms less scary. Not through better technology or stronger infrastructure, but through simple recognition that individual resilience was nothing compared to collective care. When the power went out, the real connection turned on. And once illuminated, that connection proved more reliable than any electrical grid, more durable than any storm, and more valuable than any insurance policy could ever be. The experiment that had begun with a freak store and a neighborhood full of strangers had evolved into something unprecedented, a community that had chosen to prioritize presence over productivity, relationship over convenience, and collective well-being over individual optimization. And in a world growing increasingly digital, isolated, and fragmented, the people of Maple Ridge Drive had discovered that the most revolutionary act might be the oldest one of all. Simply showing up for each other, one powerless day at a time.